In the last few weeks of Overwatch League competition, we've seen teams continuously adapt and improve, looking for every possible advantage they can get, no matter how small. In this video, we will be highlighting a couple of these microplays, which might be too small to merit a full-length analysis video but are no less interesting or important. After successfully defending Point A from the Dynasty, it was the Charge's turn to attack. Having suffered damage after an initial flank by Fitz at the start of the round and tracking Eileen's ult charge, the Charge likely knew that the Dynasty were almost primed for an EMP. Constantly swinging about to catch a potentially stealthed enemy Sombra, Char is on the hunt checking corners and staying near the back, as that's where Fitz would most likely try to land an EMP for maximum value. On a mission to take out the Sombra, he commits to a whip shot to check the corner around the arch, but comes up empty-handed. With EMP ready, Sol pulled the trigger for the coordinated dive, with Gesture leaping into the charge. However, after falling back to guard the rear once again, and with Winston diving into his team, he hears Sombra's voice line,
¿Qué tal?
when she says when stealth is revealed, and instantly reacts knowing full well who the real threat was. This was instantaneous, followed up by a turnaround shield bash by Chara, who stuns Fitz mid-EMP, cancelling the latter's ult. Should the EMP have landed, the Charge would have lost the skirmish the Dynasty were trying to force, as they would have been barred from being able to use both Shu's Transcendence, which was near 100%, as well as Nero's Duplicate. At the end of the day, not only did they deal with them with a demanding 3-0 victory, but did so without dropping a single map point. With the advent of the hero pool system taking out hitscan DPS at times amongst other popular picks, Torbjorn has seen an increase in play rate, with teams demonstrating many interesting ways to play around his kit. One of these plays is seen in the series between the LA Valiant and the Dallas Fuel. As the Valiant approaches the Fuel's frontline on the high ground of Eichenwald's tower, Gamsu turns on the aggression. With his enemies grouped up and his Earth Shatter on hand, this would have been a highlight reel moment for him. But as he goes in for the charge, KSF manages to pull off a clutch play and masterfully intercept the Crusader by deploying his turret. Even though his charge didn't connect, Gamsu still tries to go for the shatter but doesn't get any value out of it. During Gamsu's assault, the Fuel had sent their D.Va into the backline for a sandwich play. But now with this window of opportunity, the Valiant attempt to utilize their Lucio speed boost to run past the Fuel's Reinhardt shield and put on the pressure. Timing their push with Torb's Molten Core, the Valiant isolates Gamsu as KSF shoots pools of lava behind the Fuel's Rein in order to cut off his retreat path. This lets the Valiant focus him down as he takes damage walking backwards into the lava, before hopping off to retake the payload and push for the checkpoint.
Get rocked. Yeah, they play forward. I think Gamsu tries to go aggressive, and then they just commit themselves to a fight where they burn down from the Molten Core being spread all over that high ground.
Soon, from the Paris Eternal, is a player who you always want to keep an eye out for, as you never know where or when he might pop up. Throughout his years of competitive experience, Soon has developed quite the reputation, with a history of pulling off unexpected backcaps and amazing flanks. In his team's match against the Florida Mayhem, we were able to witness a prime example of just how potent his flanks can be, especially when on a coordinated team. When it came time for the Eternal to attack on Numbani, it seemed like things were going in their favor, with the payload being escorted at what felt like a record-breaking pace. But just as it was meters away from the final checkpoint, the Mayhem were able to come out on top in two back-to-back fights and wrestle back momentum of the map into their favor.
But you look at the amount of ultimates that were used there, and okay, they only used 2 ults, but their others were nowhere near to being online.
Knowing that the Eternal will have some key ultimates on hand, and after recently committing some of their own in order to win a prior fight, the Mayhem push out and set up a defensive foothold spread across the high ground, with players positioned just outside of the Eternal spawn room. If the Mayhem had tried to continue holding around the payload itself, they would have been too grouped up and vulnerable to the double ults of the Eternal's tank and supports. Instead of trying to brute force their way through, the Eternal have a craftier solution in mind. Opting to push through the narrow choke of the Sigma bot Chair building, the Eternal appears to at first attempt to contest the Mayhem's positioning and force them off the high ground. However, unbeknownst to the Mayhem, this was more of a distraction. During the skirmish, Soon does what he does best, and uses Shadow Step to sneak past the enemy lines and makes his way onto the undefended payload. Right as Soon makes contact with the payload, the Mayhem go on high alert, as they realize that the unthinkable was potentially about to happen. And in this moment of panic, the Mayhem fall into the Eternal's pincer trap. Almost immediately after seeing the payload inch forward, BQB reacts and Shadow Steps himself back onto the cart. He is joined by Yaki, who cuts through the building so that they can both deal with Soon. But with the Mayhem ditching their position and trying to retreat to the payload, Hanbin pulls the trigger with his Gravitic Flux, catching 4 players in the archway, locking them up in the air and allowing his team to begin melting their health bars. Committing a Coalescence and throwing the Bongo down to amplify their collective firepower, the Mayhem lose both their supports, with the tanks and DPS falling themselves shortly after. Even though Paris would go on to later lose the map and the series in a 3-0, they demonstrate how a well-timed disruption can send a team's coordinated defense into a state of disarray, and cause mistakes to occur that otherwise would not have happened. A good D.Va bomb is a sight to behold in the Overwatch League, as most pros are able to react accordingly, whether it be escaping the line of sight or raising a barrier to block its damage. In the case of Defiant versus the Gladiators, a series of well-timed microplays within the span of a few seconds made for quite an impressive coordinated moment that we knew we had to showcase. Starting off, we see here that the Defiant have lost their Reinhardt in the skirmish as the two teams fight for control of Lijiang's tower control center. Without Beast to act as an anchor and the Gladiators about to flip the point, the Defiant have Nevix's D.Va bomb primed and know that now is the time to act. Nevix flies on top of the central pillar and nearly dies in the process, as the Gladiators know full well what he is trying to do. He activates self-destruct with the suit about to detonate at a great spot at the center of the point. And here is where the Defiant's team play shines. Slowing things down, we see that OGE reactively repositions to raise his shield to protect Shaz's Moira. However, during this chaotic moment, Agilities was able to raise a clutch ice wall behind OGE, boosting the Gladiator's Moira into the bomb's line of sight.
Enemy spotted.
It's hard to say if this was an intentional play to boost the Moira as part of his efforts to trade the Gladiators or just luck. But while this is going on, swapping over to Rocky's POV, we can see that he is out for blood, with his sights set on none other than Space's Orisa. As the enemy tanks looks for shelter, Rocky ganks him from the side with a boop that pushes Space on top of Agility's ice wall. What follows is a 2-kill from the D.Va bomb that instantly flips the tempo of the fight. Things do get a bit messy afterwards, but end up with the Defiant ultimately walking away with the map win. And that is all for this episode of Microplays. Which play was your favorite, and what would you like us to look at next? Let us know in the comments below.